The BC government has released its new climate change plan. It's called Clean BC, and it aims to shift people's homes, vehicles, and the province's industry away from fossil fuels and into green energy, according to the government. Here are the highlights. Every building built in BC will be net zero energy, ready by 2032. By 2040, every car sold will need to be zero emission. The government will spur those changes by offering tax breaks. When it comes to industry, BC will redirect carbon tax money back to companies that move to cleaner technologies. The government says this will cut emissions by 40% by 2030. How expensive is the plan, and is the government confident British Columbians will support such big policy changes? John Horgan is BC's Premier, and he joins me now from Vancouver. Hi, Premier Horgan. Great pleasure to have you on the show. Thanks for coming.
Hi, Vashi. Good to be here.
I of course, want to ask you more specifics about the climate plan, but I have to start off with the upcoming First Ministers meeting, because we've heard from provinces, and specifically earlier on the show, Premier Brian Pallister, who said they're upset with the agenda and particularly how much of the floor federal ministers will have versus FaceTime with the Prime Minister. Do you share their concerns?
Well, we did have a conference call yesterday to talk about the agenda, and it was late in arriving. I didn't see it until yesterday morning. I would have hoped certainly for more time for us to talk together. There are three new premiers, counting the Premier of Ontario, who arrived at in his first week on the job to our gathering in New Brunswick last summer. But we have a new Premier in Quebec, a new Premier in New Brunswick, and it would have been an opportunity for us to spend more time talking directly to the Prime Minister. But having said that, I certainly want to hear from Minister Morneau about his financial update. I want to work with Minister McKenna on climate action. And of course, Minister LeBlanc, a former fisheries minister, is very important to me here in British Columbia with salmon on the brink here. So I'm quite happy to hear from ministers. I share the view of my colleagues at the Premier's table, however, that the intent of the meeting was for us to talk together rather than to have briefings from the ministers. If they want to provide their slides so we can read that on the plane and talk about it when we get there.
Are you worried at all about the level of acrimony leading into the meeting, and if it will perhaps impact anything tangible that comes out of it, or the ability to get something tangible out of the meeting?
No, I don't believe that. Well, I'm not certainly coming looking for acrimony. Quite the contrary. I'm coming to look for support for a range of initiatives that I believe will make British Columbia stronger and require federal participation. So I'm looking forward to the discussions. As I say, all the ministers that were scheduled to talk with us, I have no problem having them as resources as we have a conversation. And I think that was the theme of our conversation as premiers yesterday was, by all means, let's have these discussions. I want to hear more from our ambassador to the United States on issues around aluminum tariffs, which have a huge impact here, an update on the new NAFTA 2.0 U.S., Mexico, Canada agreement. These were the things we wanted to talk about. So we need experts to give us that advice, and that's what the ministers will do. So I'm not concerned about the agenda. I would prefer more time. I'm coming a long way to sit down with people. I would prefer to talk to First Ministers and the Prime Minister directly, and I'm sure I'll get that opportunity.
On your climate plan, Premier, it includes only one phase, the first phase of the LNG project. Will other phases prevent you from reaching your targets?
Well, I certainly am excited about LNG Canada's decision to make an investment here in British Columbia. It's going to have a profound impact on the economy here and across the country. But second and third phases, other projects, they'll have to fit into our climate plan. And we made that very, very clear in our discussions and negotiations with LNG Canada. They have approved phase one. They have not approved phase two. Capital is difficult to come by in the corporate sector as well as in the public sector. So I'm worried about what's in front of me, and I think that's what prudent governments will do. I'm looking forward to working with LNG Canada, but I'm more focused right now on Clean BC, which we announced today, about changing how we do business here in British Columbia. This was supported by the BC Business Council, the largest industries and employers in British Columbia. We have a memorandum of understanding with that group of industry leaders to show the way. We're working with Indigenous communities, environmentalists, the labor movements. This is a unique time in BC's history where everyone is on the same page, and it's because of the urgency of the situation. We have on the other side of the world governments and from certainly the federal government and other nation states meeting in Poland to resolve the challenges that we face as a species and all the other species that are with us on this globe. And this is urgent and pressing, and British Columbians have felt that way for a long time.
The Clean BC plan, though, only gets you 3/4 of the way to your targets. Will you be able to achieve the final 25% while developing LNG to the extent the province is? And I take your point that the next phases haven't been approved yet, but should they be approved, doesn't that put the final 25% in jeopardy?
Well, they won't be approved if they can't fit into the plan. That puts the onus on the investment community to make sure that they're bringing state-of-the-art technologies to bear on resource development in British Columbia. LNG Canada will be among the cleanest LNG facilities on the globe, and I think they can do even better. E-drives or electric drives on the liquefaction process, for example, is one area that we want to talk to LNG Canada about. We also want to talk again to the federal government. One of the primary reasons for my trip to Montreal is to talk to the Prime Minister in our bilaterals about the importance of electrification of the gas fields in BC and indeed in Alberta as well, so that we can reduce the carbon at the wellhead and get it to waterline and to other markets with having as little impact on our requirements to meet our targets as possible.
You referenced COP24, Premier, and there is a lot of discussion happening right now following kind of back-to-back UN reports, essentially laying out that federally Canada won't meet its targets, the 2030 targets. And in addition, we should all be setting more aggressive targets if we actually want to have an impact on climate change. Would you support more aggressive federal targets?
Absolutely. And again, I've been an ally of the Prime Minister from the beginning. In fact, we have a carbon price in BC. We have had for a decade. I gave credit to former Liberal Premier Gordon Campbell today for having the courage a decade ago to lead the country. And now we want to pick up the ball where he left it. The previous administration stopped their quest for solutions, and we've seen our emissions rise. We have already implemented a $5 a ton increase since we were sworn in, another $5 a ton expected in April of next year, and getting to the $50 target that the federal government has set. We disagree with both Saskatchewan and Ontario that carbon taxes can be a drag on the economy. We have the hottest economy in the country. We have led the country in unemployment for the past 14 months, and we have had a carbon price for a decade. We believe that you can address the challenges of our time and also have robust economic activity. That's certainly been the experience here in BC.
The UN, though, is saying that that Canada is not set to even meet the current targets. Are you open to making your province's targets more aggressive? And I again note that this plan only gets you 3/4 of the way to the current one.
Well, that again, it's a 2050 plan. We're going to meet our targets for 2030 with the 25% remaining. And we had Dr. Andrew Weaver, my colleague in the legislature, working with us on the plan. We had a host of other modelers who've been working on climate action for a long, long time. British Columbia, as you know, has led the way. We have a lot of creative and credible people on this issue here in BC, and we're going to do everything we can to meet those targets. And the 25% gap over the next 12 years, we believe we can realize through tech change and innovation, because innovation is going to be what continues to drive the economy, not just in BC, but right across Canada and indeed the world. We are well placed to take advantage of that because of our abundant green hydroelectricity, which again goes back to decisions made by governments 50, 60 years ago. We happen to be, my government at this point in time, the beneficiaries of the good work of other governments to get us to this point, and we believe it's our responsibility to take the ball and carry it as hard as we can to meet the targets that Canada has set. And as a subnational government, we have a role to play, and we're going to meet it. With respect, though, Premier, that doesn't really answer my question. Are you willing to set more aggressive targets? I believe the targets that we've set are consistent with what we were asked to do after Paris, and we're going to do that. If the federal government changes the plan, we'll do everything we can to meet it. But we're going to see reductions in 2030, 2040, and 80% by 2050. That's our obligation under the federal plan. If the federal plan changes, we'll adapt. We'll adjust to that and continue to do what we can to lead our other provinces and other citizens to that place where we can have prosperity for everyone, including Indigenous communities who have been dependent on the land base largely and have seen those resources disappear over the past 150 years as they've been exploited by others. So we want to make sure everyone benefits from the prosperity of clean BC as we transform our economy to meet the challenges of the 21st century. All right, thank you so much for your time, Premier Horgan. Thanks, Vashi. See you in Montreal. See you there in a couple days.